Most people never fail in public. They fail in private, quietly, repeatedly, long before the world ever sees the result. That is the part nobody wants to hear. The collapse does not begin on the stage. It begins in the empty room. In the morning, you let slide. In the promise you quietly break. In the small decision to choose comfort because no one will know the difference. And that is exactly why it becomes dangerous. What destroys a future rarely looks dramatic while it is happening. It looks harmless, reasonable, temporary, almost invisible. The world sees outcomes and mistakes them for beginnings. It sees the body, the business, the discipline, the control, the success, and assumes the story began there. But the real story began much earlier in silence, in repetition, in the moments where there was no pressure to perform, no reward for consistency, no applause waiting at the end. That is where a person either starts becoming someone reliable or starts training themselves to disappear the moment effort becomes inconvenient. This is what most people never understand about private effort. It is not just producing results, it is producing identity. Every unseen action is a vote cast for the kind of person you are becoming. Not the kind you want to look like, the kind you are rehearsing. Every time you follow through when nobody is watching, you build evidence. Evidence that your word means something. Evidence that your standards still apply in silence. Evidence that discipline is not a mood you wear in public, but a structure you carry in private. And every time you do not, something else is built. Not failure in the obvious sense, something quieter, a subtle erosion of self-trust. The task remains undone, but the deeper loss is not the missed session, the missed hour, the missed effort. The deeper loss is that your mind records what happened. It notices that when there was no witness, your standards became negotiable. It notices that your identity changes when the spotlight leaves. And over time, those records become belief. Not a spoken belief, but a lived one. A hidden conclusion. I only become disciplined when something outside me is holding me in place. That is where the real danger begins. Because if your effort depends on visibility, then your effort does not fully belong to you. It belongs partly to pressure, partly to recognition, partly to the possibility of being seen. Remove those things, and the structure weakens. Many people call that lack of motivation. It is often something deeper than that. It is dependence on external reinforcement. They do not lack ambition, they lack private alignment. The Stoics understood this with frightening clarity. Marcus Aurelius did not write for applause. He wrote to stay in command of himself, to return again and again to principle without the help of recognition. That matters because character is not tested first when others are present. It is tested when there is no consequence for drifting. When the easy option is near, the hard option is invisible, and no one would ever know which one you chose. That is where the public version of you is secretly being prepared. This is why success in public often looks mysterious to people who do not respect the private hours. They see the result and think talent was the difference, or timing, or luck. Sometimes those things matter, but more often, what they are actually seeing is accumulated private evidence. A person who kept showing up without needing to be seen. A person who kept acting the same way in obscurity as they hoped to act in visibility. A person who built internal order before the world had any reason to reward it. There is a hard truth inside this. Most people do not need more advice. They need less negotiation with themselves. They already know what matters. They know what they should be doing. The problem is not knowledge. The problem is that the decision gets reopened every day. In the moment of fatigue, in the moment of boredom, in the moment where delay feels harmless. They keep asking again and again whether they feel like being the person they said they wanted to become. And every time that question is reopened, identity becomes unstable. The private mind learns from repetition, not intention. It does not care what you meant to do. It watches what you repeatedly do when nobody is there to reward or punish you. That is why philosophy becomes practical here. Epictetus said, "Do not explain your philosophy, embody it." That line destroys performance. It leaves no room for the fantasy of being a disciplined person in theory. It demands continuity between what you believe and what you practice in the dark. At first, this is uncomfortable to accept because it makes every quiet moment heavier. Not in a dramatic way, in a truthful way. You realize the small choices were never small. They were always cumulative. They were teaching your nervous system what kind of person you are under no pressure. They were deciding whether your future self would stand on something stable or something performative. Because that is the split that changes everything. Performing discipline and possessing discipline are not the same thing. Performance needs an audience. It sharpens when watched. It softens when alone. It is fueled by deadlines, by comparison, by urgency, by the fear of being seen as inconsistent. But real discipline is quieter than that. It does not become more real when attention appears. It is already there. It continues with or without witnesses. It does not ask whether anyone cares. It cares because it has become part of self-respect. And that is where success actually begins to compound. Not merely when you do the work, but when you stop needing the work to be visible in order to feel real. A strange peace enters at that point. You stop waiting for motivation to return. You stop needing perfect conditions. You stop romanticizing the future version of yourself while betraying the present one in small, convenient moments. There is less drama and more steadiness, less self-talk and more execution, less obsession with outcomes and more attention to the person those outcomes require. The world does not reward intention. It rewards what intention becomes after boredom, repetition, delay, and silence have done their work on it. That is why the unseen hours matter so much. They strip everything away. No image to maintain, no one to impress, no narrative to protect. Just you and the truth of your standards. That truth is not always flattering, but it is incredibly useful. Because once you see clearly who you are when nothing is forcing you, you also see exactly where your future is being built or quietly abandoned. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you will do." There is no escape from that line. It makes identity measurable. Not by words, not by ambition, not by self-image, by repetition, by behavior, by what continues in the absence of pressure. And once you understand that deeply, a strange shift happens. Private effort no longer feels lonely. It feels sacred. It becomes the place where your life is most honestly shaped. Then something subtle changes. The gap between your private self and your public self begins to close. You no longer need the environment to drag the best out of you. You bring more of that structure with you. The world starts seeing consistency, but the real victory happened long before that. The real victory was that you stopped requiring eyes to become serious. You stopped needing applause to obey your own standards. You stopped treating private compromise like it had no cost. That is why success happens when no one is watching. Not because the unseen moment is magical, because it is honest, It reveals whether you are merely attached to the image of greatness or committed to the process that creates it. It reveals whether your standards are decorative or real. It reveals whether you are building a life or just performing one. And in the end, the world only meets the person you practiced becoming in private.